You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to episode number 45 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. Today is a Sunday, and I am recording just after being on a half-day event put on by the ISO's Inclusion and Diversity Committee. They had a day of meetings, discussions, speakers, and reflections on inclusion and diversity in SAA. At first, I thought about doing a recap of the entire event, and there's just too much to cover. I'm going to try to put as many links in the show notes as I can for different meetings and committees and contacts, since there were so many provided in the meeting. The first speaker was Bennett, and she will be actually speaking at the quarterly SAA and COSA speaker meeting in February, and I am hoping to be sharing those recordings here on the podcast very soon. The focus of today's episode is going to be on the traditions, and specifically Tradition 1, which states our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon SAA unity. And I have some readings picked out from the Green Book as well as Voices of Recovery, and I will be getting to those shortly. I did want to cover briefly some of the other things that happened at the event. We had lots of different videos from different groups, and I will try to list some of those right here. And some of the videos that we heard from were from the SAA Dissociative Identity Disorder meeting, DID, and on the podcast we covered that information when Sarah B. was a guest on episode number 34. Some of the other videos that we heard from were We Are Priceless meeting, which is something that is set up for former sex workers. And we did also on the podcast have the story from Megan from the UK on episode number 31, and she is a former sex worker. So if you're interested in listening to those episodes, please feel free. We also had members from India talking about their struggles about not having literature available in Hindi and what it's like to be an SAA from India. There's another one called Breaking the Chains, and this is for people who have issues with being arrested and served prison terms. It's highly, highly recommended meetings, and I will try to do my best to put as many links into the show notes as possible. Also, neurodiversity, and I got a PDF from the neurodiversity group. That group covers things like autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, personality disorders, bipolar disorders, dyspraxia, Tourette's syndrome, obsessive compulsive disorder, Asperger's, and dyslexia. And so there is a group for that as well in SAA. And Deb W. was a guest on episode number 20 of the podcast, where we talked about intimacy and sexual avoidance. And we did have a video from the Intimacy and Sexual Avoidance Awareness Committee. We also had one for LGBT Outreach, and another one from the Women's Outreach Committee. One of the things that Bennett talked about was BIPOC issues, being black in this program. And BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and Persons of Color. And she has started a meeting for women of color called Lemonade. And I will be posting information about how to get a hold of her if you are interested in joining that meeting. And we'll also probably be talking about that when she is on the quarterly SAA and COSA speaker meeting. Some of the other things that were covered, there was a workshop where we talked about different questions about identification. What am I? Who am I? What is sex to me? What is sexuality, sex in society? How do I relate to others? Where am I situated in the world? What is recovery? And what or who is my higher power? The other workshop, we talked about the traditions. Tradition 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon SAA unity. Tradition 3, the only requirement for SAA membership is a desire to stop addictive sexual behavior. Tradition 10, Sex Addicts Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the SAA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. And we've talked about this tradition quite a few times here on the podcast. And we also talked about Tradition 12. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. So the focus of this episode is going to be on Tradition 1. And I did want to read from the Green Book, and this is on page 78. As recovering sex addicts, we all need the love and support of fellow SAA members. We need to hear each other's experience, strength, and hope. We need sponsors and other recovering addicts to guide us through the steps of the program. If we are having a hard time and want to act out, we need to be able to pick up the telephone and call someone in the fellowship who understands. We can't recover alone. Instead, we find the freedom we seek as interrelated parts of a greater whole. In the same way, our groups are strengthened when we forge supporting connections with other SAA groups and with the fellowship as a whole. Unity means that as a group, we set our sights on the common needs of all recovering sex addicts, and this links us together across all languages and borders. Each member's recovery depends on the well-being of all. And skipping down through the second paragraph, diversity of thought and opinion helps make our service work vital and creative. The first tradition channels this creative energy towards a single goal, the welfare of recovering sex addicts. When we put this common need ahead of our individual desires, we can enjoy our differences while maintaining our unity of purpose. So I really wanted to read that as a background on Tradition 1 and why we were talking about it, that all these differences of opinions, different types of people in our program can all collectively be part of something that makes us better as a whole. At the beginning of the event, there was a reading from Voices of Recovery, and this is from March 15th on page 75. And the first quote was from the second paragraph that I just read. Diversity of thought and opinion helps make our service work vital and creative. The first tradition channels this creative energy towards a single goal, the welfare of recovering sex addicts. And that is on SAA page 78. At first glance, this tradition may seem clear enough, the principle of unity, being in accord, harmonious, undivided. Yet the connection to music implied by a synonym of unity, namely harmony, calls to mind not the copy, but rather the sum of many voices, or many parts, joining to create something greater. In our fellowship, our individual voices can clash with one another when we insist that we have the only right way, and this can become restrictive, disharmonious, or one note. If we had just one voice, we would not have a vital, ever-growing community of fellowship. Our voices can remain distinct, yet join together to create something complementary to the broader message or song of SAA. As with singing, layering our distinct experiences, strengths, and hopes becomes a beautiful blending that transforms and uplifts our message. How can I have a clear, unique voice in our fellowship that complements and enriches the wider message of Sex Addicts Anonymous? And for many of you that have listened to this podcast before know that I have a deep, deep connection with music. And so hearing this reading, I connected instantly with the thought of one voice versus the voices of many, and the harmony bringing together something that is complementary to the melody. So the second half of this episode, I just wanted to cover briefly. I can go off on all sorts of different songs that include beautiful harmonies, but there were a few that came to mind instantly. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, or just any of their songs really. Their combined voices, that harmony is something that brings peace to me, and I just love how their voices blend to make something greater than one individual voice.
Don't let the past remind us of what we are not now. I am not dreaming. I am yours. You are mine. You are what you are. You make it hard.
I had also thought about many, many different pieces of music in bluegrass where there are beautiful, beautiful harmonies, and too many to choose, and I may throw in a little sample here post-production. No song in particular is jumping out at me, but so many to choose from.
And I'll never be lonesome, lonesome again. Up there with my Savior and friend, by the beautiful throne, I'll have a mansion of my own. Then I'll never be lonesome again.
I have one song in particular that I want to cover in detail. I also wanted to talk about my favorite new discovery of the past year, the band Heilung, the Northern European neo-pagan Viking band. They have a song called Traust, in which there's a call and response. Maria is singing one vocal line, and the voices of the many come together and form this just loud wall of strength. I believe the translation of the title is Trust, but I wanted to play a little bit of that here. Song, I actually made a guitar video blending multiple guitars over the song as well. One of the songs that was mentioned in the workshop was Carmina Burana from Karl Orff. Many of you will recognize this. It's been used in a lot of movie trailers and things like that. When the chorus of many voices join together, it just invokes something amazing. So I'll play a little bit of the quiet bit here with just a few voices, and then when the entire chorus comes together, you can see how the combined voices make something just so much more grandiose. amazing piece. The song that I really wanted to focus on is a song by Pucifer. And I have played some of their music here on the podcast before, and many of you will recognize the voice as Maynard from Tool. This is one of his other projects. The song is called Humbling River. I don't think I've played it here on the podcast, this song in particular, but it covers the struggle of one person trying to defeat everything on their own and trying to cross this river, the river being the metaphor of something that seems like an impossible task to do on your own. And slowly but surely, other voices start blending in, and it talks about being able to do this together. And I'll play a little bit of just the solo voice, and then when the blended voices come together, so many different parts of the song. I would love to play the entire thing.
Brave the forest, brave the stone, brave the icy winds and fire, braved and beat them on my own, yet I'm helpless by the river.
But yeah, Angel, Angel, what have I done? I've faced the quakes, the wind and fire. I've conquered country, crown and throne. Why can't I cross this river? And when the voices start blending, it gets more into, it'll take a lot more than words and guns, a whole lot more than riches and muscle. The hands of the many must join as one, and together we'll cross this river. And then there's this brilliant splitting of the chorus and the verse, kind of a dual part that brings me to tears. And I've talked about this song in some of the music and recovery workshops that I've done. So enjoy.
It'll take a lot more than words and guns, a whole lot more than riches and muscle. The hands of the many must join as one, and together we'll cross the river. Nature, nurture, heaven. It'll take a lot more than words and guns, some falling by the a whole lot more than riches and muscle. To conquer every mountain. The hands of the many must join as one, and together we'll cross the river. Brave the forest, brave. It'll take a lot more than words and guns. Brave the icy winds, a whole lot more than riches and muscle. Brave and beat them on my the hands of the many must join as one, and together we'll cross the river.
Gives me chills every time. Love that song. So I will be putting links to the songs that I used here on the podcast in the show notes, and as many of the links that I can find with emails for the groups that were mentioned at the beginning. Paul M., the director of the ISO, also had a message. The ISO committees are looking for diversity. And this is from Paul. We want to diversify our ISO committees, but we need a diverse list of candidates. Please fill out a service resume if you would like to do service at the ISO level. The service part of 12-step recovery was essential for my recovery. And the link for that is saa-recovery.org/saa-service-resume. And I'll put that link in the notes as well. So trying to find ways to add a more diverse group in ISO service, whether it's on different committees. I know the literature committee is always looking for more people. Yeah, there are so many different committees and groups that can be helped by having a more diverse population. If you are wanting to be of service, please fill out an SAA service resume and get that in there so that you can be part of the whole. Some of the many other things that we have going on, I did find a few contacts at the Diversity and Inclusion half-day event of people that might like to be a guest here on the podcast. And
I did start messing around with editing voice pitch to help further disguise people who have been hesitant to share their stories here on the podcast. And you can hear a little bit of that technology here.
Yeah, in addition to that, I have been in contact with a few of the guys that are putting together the 2022 International Convention, which will be taking place in Atlanta, Georgia this year. That'll be upcoming Memorial Day weekend, May 27th through the 30th. I do have information on how to join that. We want to keep that information private, so I won't be publishing that here on the podcast, but we will be having the co-organizers of this year's convention here on the podcast in a few weeks. And like I mentioned, we'll have the quarterly SAA and COSA speaker meetings coming up. Trying to get people lined up week per week has been a challenge. And so this week, flying solo, I had different ideas of what to do for the episode this week. And this is one of the reasons why it is a little bit delayed for the week. One of the things that I forgot to mention is that the Bay Area Intergroup is looking at revamping our website and trying to make it more inclusive, change some of the languaging to be more welcoming, and to cover much more diversity in our fellowship. If you happen to be interested in working on that, we are moving to a WordPress format. If you're in the Bay Area and want to be part of that, you can always come to our intergroup meetings, or you can reach out to me. You can do that here at my podcast email address, which is jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. You can also use that if you want to be a guest on a future episode or have any other questions about the podcast. If you have any feedback for the podcast, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. We did receive one email while we were on the event from hopefully a future guest, and I'm going to keep the name anonymous. And it says, "Just wanted to say I really enjoy listening to the podcast and glad that it's picked up again. Love how brave and open all the speakers and you have been on the podcast. Truly inspiring and has been great to listen to on my way to work. Thank you for your great service." Well, thank you very much. Like I mentioned last week, we've been getting a lot of comments on the YouTube episodes, and there are quite too many to read through today, so I'll be doing that on a future episode. But yeah, please feel free to comment there or send us feedback at the email address that I just mentioned. Anyway, I really thank you for tuning in to this episode. Much gratitude for the ISO Inclusion and Diversity Committee for what they put on this weekend. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.